I'm a little embarrassed to admit this, but one of my favorite Christmas movies is the romantic comedy, or rom-com, Love Actually. I don't know if the term cheesy is still used, and I hope it's not offensive here in one of the cheese capitals of the world, but that's what this movie really is. It's predictable, overly sentimental, almost gooey with warm, good-feeling emotions. As the movie begins, we see scenes from Heathrow Airport. Various loved ones are saying hello to one another as one arrives on a flight, or saying goodbye before a loved one departs. And the narrator explains that whenever he feels gloomy, he thinks on this scene. General opinion, he observes, is starting to make out that we live in a world of hatred and greed. But I don't see that. It seems to me that love is everywhere. Often it's not particularly dignified or newsworthy, but it's always there. Fathers and sons, mothers and daughters, husbands and wives, boyfriends, girlfriends, old friends. If you look for it, I've got a sneaky feeling you'll find that love actually is all around. Well, whenever I think on this Love Actually movie, I can't help but remember a conversation I had with a street preacher about the same time that I saw this movie. I don't know if really street preachers exist here. I don't know, maybe it's an American thing, but it's not unusual to go through a city and see somebody preaching very loudly, oftentimes from street corners, and encountered one of these gentlemen. And as I was walking down the street with my family, and the gentleman was yelling quite loudly through a bullhorn about all the things that God supposedly hates. As we got closer, I saw that he had helpfully listed on a board all of the things that God hates. In big letters was written at the top, God hates, and then there was a list, line, go with that one, pornography, all right, homosexuals, don't agree about that one, and the Roman Catholic Church, I don't agree about that one either. Surprisingly, at least to me, the Roman Catholic Church was the one that he was really passionate about and kept saying the Pope was the whore of Babylon. So all I could do was just shake my head and say, my goodness. I thought I had said this under my breath, but apparently he heard me and took it as an invitation to talk with me. Never mind, I was about 50 feet away. I was going to just keep on walking, but then my wife decided, no, we should stop and have a conversation. After they had a couple of back and forths and the volume got a little louder and louder, then we finally walked on along the street and the street preacher started yelling at somebody else. What really just didn't sit well with me with this particular preacher was that, as best as I could tell of this short encounter, he thought he had all the answers, and he wasn't going to listen to anyone who didn't agree with him. Plus, he just flung verses at us about, Bible verses at us about all the things that God hates. It was like the Bible was a weapon to hurt us. This street preacher's way of approaching Scripture was a little different than how these temple teachers approach it in the scripture passage we just heard. In the gospel passage, this 12-year-old Jesus is sitting there in the temple among the teachers, listening to them and asking questions. Instead of using scripture to divide or threaten, this group, these teachers and Jesus, are sitting there exploring and wondering and studying the Bible together. But what I think is so neat here is that Jesus seems to be a full part of this community, this group of teachers. He's listening to them and talking with them, and they're listening to him. They don't just dismiss him or shoo him away. Any discussions like this can be challenging, since a lot of times, especially when it comes to reading Scripture, there aren't clear answers. A lot of times there's not one meaning of a particular text. And I found that it's often these sort of messy discussions with lots of questions and back and forth and wondering together that can be the most fruitful. But then Jesus' parents show up, and Mary asks, "Son, why have you treated us like this? Your father and I have been anxiously searching for you." And Jesus, in true 12-year-old style, my apologies, Ellie, my daughter, who's 12, but in true 12-year-old style, basically asks her what her problem is. Why were you searching for me? I can almost hear Jesus do a duh. Didn't you know I had to be in my Father's house? This is no idealized family. There are clearly some family tensions here. We're told that Jesus and his parents really just don't understand each other. Especially at this time of year, we're surrounded in advertisements and any sort of media, surrounded with images of perfect, happy families where everyone gets along. Maybe these families exist, but I have yet to encounter one. Real families, like real life, a lot of times it's messy. There are tensions, there are arguments, there are disagreements. But it's in that messiness that God is pleased to dwell. That's where we really encounter the love, because we can be in the middle of that messiness and still hold together and still love each other and even grow in love. What most inspires me, I think, in this passage is how the various people respond to the messiness that they face. They're the temple teachers that we started with, who, rather than trying to force their agenda or their particular interpretation down Jesus' throat, so they're the opposite of that street preacher, they welcome the young Jesus' questions, and they have a real discussion with them. That could be sort of messy, perhaps without some clear answers, but the relationships through the discussion were growing. And then there was Mary, who responded to her lack of understanding about her son, not by trying to force him to be what she thought he should, not trying to force a round peg into a square hole, but she really just thought about it. She pondered these things. She treasured all these things in her heart. I can't imagine any parent wants their kid running off, even if it's to the temple, wants their kid running off, not knowing where they are for 3 days. I would want to force my kid to, no, you don't do that. But Mary takes a step back and just ponders all these things about Jesus. And Jesus, too, he's listened here and becomes obedient to his parents, we heard. In different ways, everybody in this passage has responded to the messiness that's just part of real life by really listening, by really embracing the messiness, by living into the messiness and the chaos and the ambiguities. Nobody in this passage proclaims, "I'm right," or "you have to do this." To return to that narrator from Love Actually, yes, there is plenty of hatred and greed in the world. We have far too many examples of it. But I think the narrator was right, that if you look for it and listen for it, I've got a sneaking feeling that you'll find that love is all around. And I would just add to what the narrator said, that love is all around, especially in those messy, tense places of our lives, whether it's Heathrow Airport or a conversation between a mom and a son who really just don't understand each other, or a tense group discussion that's gone off the rails because someone keeps asking difficult questions. But not only that, by looking and listening for love in all these sorts of places where we might not expect to find it. The bonds of love grow, and they strengthen, and they become stronger, and we grow in wisdom and stature like Christ, and in favor with God and with man. So if you look for it and listen for it, I really think you'll find love, especially in those unexpected places.